Okay.
So let's just get done with this, which is the only thing left for me to change here was to make it stop doing this ugly super fast ejection and make it slower. And basically I said, I bet it's probably going to be like, first I started off with something really small, just to get my head around the problem. And I said, okay, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for, but not really, because really what happens here is this just creates a blob. And what I want more of is a blob, but with some whiffs and particles and a little bit of essence coming off here. So I just started to adjust upward. I said, oh, what about 0.25? That started to look a little better. And eventually what I said was, and you can, people do not have to agree with me on this. You can change it to be whatever you want. But I ended up liking that particular 0.45 because of the starting effect. You see how it's irregular, etc., etc., and then creates this nice wide trail, which still has a good angle to it. And then when you hit the wall, it feels like all those particles catch up to us, and then we got our blob again before the reset occurs. So that felt about right to me compared to the original game. So now we've got our particles. It was really easy to code. I basically took somebody else's hard-earned effort, their code that they worked on for many years, and I took their example and duplicated it, modified it, and then in just a few lines of code, if we go back and look at the player, I basically included the library at the top of the file. I won't show you, but you've seen it. And in one line, I created an event that ejects the particles I want, and I started it. So all of my ugly coding here to make something beautiful over here. That was my real contribution here, is writing those two lines and then making a few tweaks to this emitter, to this particle definition.
Well, I
Well,
think
this is the particle end event. But
yeah. Well, I like the new effect. It's definitely more dynamic.
so what is left? The beauty of this is we are almost done. What we need is we need to score the game when the player is when the player passes a corner. We need to give the player a point, 1 point for every corner. Um, in addition to that, I got kind of bored as soon as I got that working, and I said, this game just is not hard enough. It's not either my game is easier than theirs, or something. I don't know, but it's just like, okay. And then I crash after 3 corners. But you get the point. The point is something about this didn't feel right. So what I said was, a couple weeks ago, I encouraged people, don't just clone games, but take the game and make it yours in some way, make it different, take the mechanic, play with it, tweak it. And so what I've done is I said every time we pass a corner, the player is going to get a little bit faster and a little bit faster and a little bit faster. So let's talk about, first of all, how we detect we go by a corner. If you look at the game, let me run it and pause it. If you think about it, what we really need to do here, the simplest way to do this, is to simply put a polygon, a rectangle, right here, add a physics body to it, and then when the player collides with it, because if you recall, when we made the player a sensor. So it doesn't, when it hits things, it doesn't bounce off. It doesn't have any physics response. So what's going to happen is the player will pass right through it. But our collision event will detect that we hit something. So if we make a polygon and we add a field to it as a flag, and I added one, I think I called it is trigger equals true. Then when the player collides with it, it can say, what did I just hit? What was that thing I just hit? Does it have a field called is trigger? Oh, it does? That means I just got a point. Now I need to do something. Now the do something in this case, and we'll look at the code in a second, is I will generate an event called onScore, and I'll just throw it out into the ether. I'll just throw it out into the game, and the player at that point, that's all it needs to do. It doesn't care about anything more. But as soon as the on-score event occurs, some other piece of code, which I will also show you, will be listening for it, and it will increment a counter, which I'll show you the code for also. We'll draw a little bar up here with a counter and a speed counter. And basically, every time we hit a bar, the player will recognize that it has hit it, and it will throw an on-score event, and it will throw another event to increment the speed. Now, I could have put those in the same, but I just wanted to demonstrate the difference. And these two timers, which I don't have yet, will increment. The player will get a little bit faster, and will get points, and the game will get harder. So let me go ahead and show you the code for drawing the polygon, first of all. So let me just find it here. All right, so the first bit here, see if I can get it all on the screen at the same time, is in the wall routine or function. Did I just lose it? So beneath the sections of code that we already have, where we draw the left wall and the right wall, the glow, the background, I added another call to display new rectangle to draw a rectangle, which is basically at the Vx, Vy, this position right here. So I'm going to draw a rectangle right here, and it's going to be as wide as the hallway, and I'll make it about 10 pixels tall, because 10, that's a reasonable size. One thing you want to be careful about is if you make the polygon too narrow and the player is moving really fast, it could, in theory, pass right through it, and the physics system would not detect that. Now, there's ways around it, but in this case, the simplest way is just to make the polygon kind of big, so there's no possibility that it won't get detected. So we make the polygon, and for demonstration purposes, because I want to show it to you, I'm going to make the alpha 0.1, although I would really want to make that 0 so we don't see it. I'm going to set that flag that I was talking about, so I add a field to the score trigger, what I'm calling our score trigger, and I say is trigger equals true, so later on when I have a collision I can check for this field and say, is that a trigger I just hit? And then the only other thing I need to do is add a body to it. So I'll make it a static body, which means that it won't move under gravity, it'll just sit there. And as soon as I save this code and reload, we're going to, I'll stop it before it hits it. Every corner will now draw one of these rectangles. So if we were to proceed, which I will not yet, you'd see a rectangle drawn across every gap. So every time we hit this, what we want to do is produce that on-score event and the speed-up event, which I don't remember the name of it. We'll look for a minute. Sorry. So let's find the rest of the trigger code.
And that makes a lot of sense.
More.
Because even if you're able to closely cut the corner or swing wide and cut the corner, you're still going to. It seems natural. Yeah, well, but the scoring just seems natural. That is the point at which you have changed directions. That is, where you have successfully eluded the wall.
That's right. You've made it around one of the goal points, or as a coworker of mine used to say, the goal bogeys.